Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Sarah Lockenvitz, and the name of my presentation, the title of my presentation is Being a Speech-Language Pathologist, Constructivism, Qualitative Orientation, and Making Meaning with Individuals with Communication Disorders. I received my Ph.D. in Applied Language and Speech Sciences from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette in 2016. I am a speech-language pathologist, licensed by the state of Missouri and credentialed by the American Speech-Language Hearing Association. I have had my license and my Cs in speech-language pathology since 2011. This is me. For the introduction to this presentation, I would like to talk a little bit about the American Speech-Language Hearing Association. The vision of the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, which is also called ASHA, is as follows: making effective communication a human right, accessible and achievable for all. Now, ASHA does the credentialing of speech-language pathologists, as well as accreditation of universities that provide education for speech-language pathologists to be. And so ASHA therefore provides this definition of speech-language pathologists, or characterizes what they are responsible for doing. Speech-language pathologists, or SLPs, work with people who have problems with speech, language, thinking, and swallowing. If you take out the thinking bit, or cognition, and if you take out the swallowing bit, or dysphagia, you're left with speech and language. Therefore, ASHA continues, SLPs work with people who have speech and language disorders. SLPs work in schools, hospitals, and clinics, and may be able to come to your home. ASHA continues, speech and language are different. A person can have problems with one or both. Learn about the difference here. This is actually a for the public page that ASHA provides on their main website. See a speech-language pathologist, or SLP, if you have concerns. So for a speech-language pathologist, the main components are, of course, speech and language. Speech, according to ASHA, is how we say sounds and words. Again, these are definitions that are sort of tailored to the public. Language refers to the words we use and how we use them to share ideas and get what we want. You can have disorders in both or either speech and language. A speech disorder, ASHA says, is when we have trouble saying sounds, stutter when we speak, or have voice problems, in which case we have a speech disorder. As far as a language disorder goes, having trouble understanding what others say is a receptive language disorder. Having problems sharing our thoughts, ideas, and feelings is an expressive language disorder. It is possible to have both a receptive and an expressive language problem. In addition to ASHA, there is an entity that's known as the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities, or the NJC. Members have come from the credentialing and accrediting organizations from related disciplines to compose this National Joint Committee, the NJC. And the related disciplines they include but are not limited to communication disorders, which is relevant here with ASHA, augmentative and alternative communication, the deaf and hard of hearing, intellectual and developmental disability, we have occupational therapy, and we have physical therapy. The NJC has developed a communication bill of rights, and the goal here is to establish the communication bill of rights in terms of how people are entitled to participate fully in communication interactions and each person should have these fundamental communication rights. There are 15 of them. The 15th is as follows: the right to have clear, meaningful, and culturally and linguistically appropriate communication. Let me repeat that. The right to have clear, meaningful, and culturally and linguistic appropriate communication. This brings me to the next section of my presentation. Now that we're all kind of on the same page with speech-language pathology and ASHA and how meaningfulness fits into the field, I would like to share a few things regarding meaningfulness in speech-language pathology. My first thought is that I like to think that being a good SLP may involve being able to find or create meaning as much as and everywhere possible. An SLP's job, in my opinion, is to help find and create meaningfulness with individuals that have a communication disorder. So as we discussed earlier, this for an SLP refers to speech and language disorders. So how can you find and create meaningfulness with an individual who has a speech disorder? What about a language disorder? And what about a language plus speech disorder? If a communication disorder is socially constructed, and this is a topic I'm really interested in, but I will save it for other discussions. But if a communication disorder is socially constructed, do SLPs find and create meaningfulness with others in spite of a communication disorder? Or perhaps do SLPs find and create meaningfulness with others through or by way of a communication disorder? My second thought is as follows. If an individual isn't fortunate enough to spontaneously find meaning or have it serendipitously appear, he or she has the ability to create it. Spontaneously finding meaning or having it serendipitously appear comes from having connections with others, which is facilitated through communication, including speech, language, and hearing. So again, my thought is that being a good SLP may involve having the ability to help individuals with communication disorders be able to find or create meaningfulness. My third thought is as follows. Find and or create meaning where it is wanted, needed, or required. That's the first component. The second component is find and or create meaning when it is wanted, needed, or required. And the third component is find and or create meaning with whom it is wanted, needed, or required. I believe that meaningfulness should be honored, considered, and treated with care and consideration. And perhaps it should only be found or created as necessary. There may in fact be a greater want, need, or requirement to find and or create meaning with individuals who have communication disorders than with individuals who do not. We have this natural ability, an inherent ability to find and create meaning with typical individuals. We do this all the time without even thinking. And one thing that can really help an SLP is to really master and understand how we do this with typical individuals. And from there, SLPs can determine a good way to do this with individuals who have communication disorders. You know, we use speech and language frequently without even noticing we're doing it, which is very cool. But you kind of have to know normal, whatever that means, before you can know not normal, whatever that means. And so this leads me to my fourth thought. Meaningfulness can be exhausting and it can drain resources. I personally have found that I get very, very tired when I do it. It is generally expected that the following can drain an individual's resources. Things like family and friends, career, education, bills, money, just life in general can drain your resources. So how exhausting might this be for individuals who have communication disorders? My fifth thought here is as follows. Do not find or create meaning when meaninglessness is wanted, needed, or required. Do not find or create meaning where meaninglessness is wanted, needed, or required. And do not find or create meaning with whom meaninglessness is wanted, needed, or required. Meaningfulness may be something that can be controlled or prioritized. Now, how might one determine how to prioritize meaningfulness? In a speech-language pathologist's case, prioritizing meaningfulness may be different in terms of whether or not you're interacting with an individual who has a communication disorder versus an individual who does not have a communication disorder. We don't always have to be meaning-making individuals. There are times when we want or need meaningfulness. There are places where we want or need meaningfulness, and there are people with whom we want or need meaningfulness. But it's exhausting, and we have to honor it and consider it and treat it with care and great consideration, and perhaps only use it as necessary. This is pretty deep stuff, I happen to think. It starts to make me wonder, what is the meaning of anything at all? It starts to get really philosophical. So I think it's time for a thought experiment. Start from here. All things can be meaningful. Anything can be meaningful. Now we'll narrow it down. So in starting from anything at all, we're going to just say all life can be meaningful. Going to continue to narrow it down. Maybe just human life can be meaningful. This is just a thought experiment. Narrowing further, narrow, narrow, narrow. My humans, my people, the people I value most in my life are meaningful. Narrower still, my life is meaningful. Narrower still, I am meaningful. And I feel like this is where I start to get a little bit weirded out. So I feel better if I reframe it like this. I have the capacity to be meaningful to somebody or something. So let's back up a minute, because now we're just getting weird, right? Let's go back to human life can be meaningful. And there is something that is uniquely human, and that is language. Language which is transmitted through speech, through sign, through augmentative or alternative communication devices, etc. And we said earlier that speech-language pathologists work with people who have speech and language disorders. And so now that we've sort of pinpointed how meaningfulness can work and what an SLP's role can be, and done a little thought experiment for how that fits into a bigger picture, how can we pinpoint when human communication is really getting meaningful? And so I've developed a sort of a strategy or a set of strategies to identify your own and others' meaningfulness. Identifying your own meaningfulness might be easy in some ways, or at least things we expect might or should be meaningful to every human being. We can list those things out because not everything is meaningful. So the list of things that we might expect to be meaningful to almost every human being includes things like family, friends, pets, vocations, pastimes, or hobbies. Personally, I happen to like things, I get pretty specific here. I like bees and other interesting creatures. I like colors, colorful things. I like crafts. I like linguistics and wordplay, phonetics, phonology, and the International Phonetic Alphabet, transcriptions. I like taking pictures or video recordings with my phone of things I want to remember. And I like things like inside jokes with friends when used appropriately. So what about you? And then, what about others? What about your humans, your people? Meaning is coded into language and transmitted through speech or sign or devices or whatever. And it's everywhere all the time with everybody. So how do we pick up on the really salient stuff for an individual that is significant to us in some way? There are signals, linguistic signals using language that indicate that someone is wanting to share something meaningful. They're going to use words that will demonstrate something meaningful to them, especially when things are proceeding in a fashion that is like all business. And these might sound something like this. Quick, where's my phone? I need to take a picture or video right now of this. Or, oh, I wish I'd taken a picture or video of that on my phone. Don't let me forget that. Or, do you have a minute? I have something to tell you. So I don't know how I got onto this, but anyway, even just and, etc., etc. All of these are linguistic signals that can indicate to a listener that something cool is going to be said or something that the speaker thinks is cool is about to be said. Let your humans, your people that you value, let your humans tell you their stories. There are also linguistic signals that indicate that someone is wanting to react to something meaningful. Personally, I find myself responding to my humans' stories with things like this. I love that. That's great. Maybe, oh no, or that's awesome. That's amazing. That's so funny. I never want to forget that. Or maybe, do you mind if I share that with person X, etc. Honor your humans' stories. So through language and speech, or whatever means of transmitting language we're going to talk about here, we build meaningful human connections. So let your humans share with you their meaningfulness. Honor their meaningfulness. And at the same time, share with your humans your own meaningfulness. Let them honor your meaningfulness. It's almost like a superpower. You're building something from nothing, or from something, you're building something from as little as nothing. Or maybe something as little as sharing the common denominator of simply being human. but you shouldn't exploit that superpower. Don't use the superpower to manipulate others or to take advantage of them. Never, ever, ever dishonor someone else's meaningfulness unless it is damaging or harmful to leave their meaningfulness alone. Use the superpower for good only. That's my advice. And so here's an example of using the superpower that's related to speech language pathology, because that's what this is all about. Here's a little bit of background. Once upon a time, there was an SLP who worked at a skilled nursing facility. He was so frustrated with how his job limited him, and he was so frustrated with how much he needed the money and the benefits from the job that he didn't want to be there. So he generated time-consuming, meaningless treatment tasks that required little effort on his part, but were enough to convince the insurance companies as well as his bosses that he was doing his job as expected. And he was. He would sit his patients down with jigsaw puzzles, and they would put the puzzles together. He would pull out home safety scene flashcards, and the patients would point out the safety hazard or the safety violation. He would start a session by giving the patients 3 random words to remember and teach them little memory techniques so they could recall the 3 words at the session's end. The patients were meeting goals. The SLP was keeping his job. He was meeting productivity requirements, and the insurance companies were reimbursing his services for his patients. Now, he pretended it was all meaningful, and since the goals were being met, nobody cared, except the patients. The SLP knew that meaningfulness in this situation, or getting everybody to buy into his choices and actions, involved 2 things. Number 1, his relationship with the patients who were very vulnerable. And number 2, the context of the money involved, which was high stakes. Because who would be paying these thousands of dollars for services at the end of the day? The SLP intuitively understood that meaningfulness is vulnerability amplified by any high stakes. So he was able to kind of fake it in order to convince his bosses and the insurance companies to buy into what he was doing. He used his superpower to exploit this intuitive understanding of what looked good to the people that gave him health insurance and paychecks that let him take care of his family. So in the end, was the SLP the only one using meaningfulness for something other than good? Well, maybe to some extent. But you know what he noticed? The SLP noticed that there were little moments when the patients were brighter, more engaged, and happier, and so on. Those moments happened when the SLP would just sit and talk with them in casual conversation, ask them about their day, listen to their stories, ask questions about their stories, and tell them how he was doing too. Those little moments happened when together the SLP and his patients used speech and language to build meaningful human connections. But it's hard to find somebody that will give you health insurance and paychecks that let you take care of your family if all you do is just sit and talk to somebody. And that's a good thing. SLPs go through years of training and education and more training and more education for a reason. They learn to guide the sitting and talking with somebody conversations down avenues that result in higher quantities and higher qualities of moments that involve brighter, more engaged, happier patients. And these moments also involve meeting goals for these specific clients. So based on my experiences and exposure to stories like these from the world of speech language pathology, I've determined and kind of tested the following, and it really works for me. Meaningfulness is vulnerability amplified by risk. I'm going to say that again. Meaningfulness is vulnerability amplified by risk. So here's an example. Another example. This one is a little more general, not as speech language pathology related, but it is in a way because it's still language. It's written language though. So watch for examples of like being able to test out this little theory here, because these examples are everywhere. I'm hoping this one is relevant and authentic to your life, because I know it is to mine. How long does it take you to answer a text message when you get it? When I get a text message or message through any app or whatever, I don't always answer right away. I'll look at who sent it and what the context of the text message is. And then I'll weigh a couple of factors, and those will determine how quickly I will answer. I'll check out and evaluate the level of vulnerability, sort of encapsulated in the text message, and I will weigh the level of risk, also encapsulated within the text message. Is it a close friend or family member? Is it somebody vulnerable who I know about? Is the text personalized? What kind of information does it contain? Could I hurt them in any way based on what their relationship is with me? Could I hurt them in any way with what they have just told me in the text message? And then as far as the level of risk, what's the urgency here? Is it an emergency? And why did they text me instead of calling me? I mean, I don't really do phone calls as much as I used to. I much prefer texting, but there's usually a reason why you choose one over the other, and vice versa. So how is that playing into it? Now I have an assignment for you as a person interested in speech language pathology. It can be a meaningfulness activity for anybody, but especially someone interested in speech language pathology. Pick and choose what you need or want to do for yourself, but at least consider each item an element of this assignment. Consider the following. Explain your understanding of the meanings of the following examples of adages. So a common speech language pathology task with kids or adults, older kids anyway, usually. Things like a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Haste makes waste. This too shall pass. Don't put the cart before the horse. Birds of a feather flock together. Stick it to the man. Or busy as a bee. I'm going to proceed through this doing a few examples just to give you an idea. So if I'm going to pick one of these, of course I'm going to choose the B one, right? So I'm going to explain my understanding of the meanings of busy as a bee, meaning of busy as a bee. And this is what I would say. Bees are really busy. They fly around a lot, finding, gathering, and retrieving pollen from flowers and other plants, pollinating all the while. They build beehives to live in and to protect their queen bee and eggs and larvae and pupae and eggs, etc. They make honeycomb, like beeswax and honey. They defend themselves by stinging things that threaten them. And if someone is busy as a bee, they are really busy. So now think about how you would explain the meanings of those examples to the following individuals from your point of view. Individuals like me, Dr. Lockenvitz. Maybe your sibling, a brother or sister, your best friend, parent or grandparent, a significant colleague or coworker, or fellow student, if you're a student, a total stranger that's an adult, Maybe your son or daughter or niece or nephew or younger cousin, you know, a younger individual that you're somewhat close to. A kid you know really well-ish, or the best that you know who's not related to you, and a total stranger kid. Whatever is relevant. I'll do a few examples. How would I explain busy as a bee to myself? See above, it's kind of weird too, but you know, gotta start somewhere. For my sibling or a best friend, I might say the following based on shared experiences and the understanding of what our relationship is. So I love bees, right? I know all about them. I used to know a lot about insects. Remember when I took that entomology class back in college? And even before then, there was this old computer game, one of those Sims games called Sim Ant that let you be an ant. And ants are very closely related to bees. Anyway, I love bees. I identify with them because I'm so busy all the time, right? Too busy to hang out sometimes. I'm busy as a bee, I guess. And then if I were going to explain it to a total stranger who was an adult, I might say something more like, I know a lot of things about bees, but everybody knows that bees do a lot of stuff, right? Fly around, pollinate, sting, make honey, raise young, etc. Bees are busy. So when somebody refers to someone or something being busy as a bee, that's what they're referring to. And then my daughter, she's 3.5 right now. If I were going to explain busy as a bee to her, it might be something like this. Annika, my little 3.5-year-old little baby girl, you dressed up as a bee for Halloween last year, right? And you know how you have a bee backpack that you use for preschool? And you know how much mommy loves bees? Well, bees are so busy. We see them flying around all the time, all over the flowers and stuff. Remember visiting Uncle John in Nevada? When we went to that playground and there were those pretty bushes with the flowers and there were so many bees and they were flying around really fast and we stayed away so we wouldn't make them mad and get stung. Are bees lazy? No, bees are not lazy at all. They are so busy. That's why when somebody is really, really busy, we might say that they are busy as a bee. Now, think about how you would explain the meanings of those examples to each of your individuals from your point of view. Only now, imagine that those individuals have the following communication disorders. A moderate hearing loss, and they're not using amplification, no hearing aids or anything. Autism spectrum disorder, so they may struggle to socially interact appropriately, and they may tend to take figurative language very literally, which really comes into play with some of these, right? ADHD, they have a very short attention span, perhaps. Limited receptive language, so they don't understand very many words, maybe, or very many big words, or long, complex sentences. And severe dementia, so perhaps they have lost most of their capacity for short-term memory and only have some long-term memories. And on their really bad days, they don't even know or remember you at all. So here's what I might say to somebody with a moderate hearing loss. Total stranger adult, again. I think I'd say the same thing, only I'd make it louder. I would yell it loudly and while facing them so they could see my mouth if they do speech reading or anything, read my lips. I know a lot of things about bees, but everybody knows that bees do a lot of stuff, right? Fly around, pollinate, sting, make honey, raise young, etc. Bees are busy. So when somebody refers to someone or something being busy as a bee, that's what they're referring to. For somebody with ADHD, short attention span, I might keep it really short, right? For a kid I know pretty well, but it's not related to me, might be something like this. Hey, bees do lots of stuff, right? They're busy. Bees are busy. So when a person is really busy, we say they're busy as a bee. And then limited receptive language. They don't understand very many words or very many big words or long complex sentences. So then I might have something like, for a total stranger kid, bees do lots of things. They are so busy. Some people do lots of things. They are so busy too. People can be busy as a bee. And lastly, think about how you would explain the meanings of those examples to each of your individuals again from your point of view. Only this time imagine that you have the following disorders. A lisp, so you have trouble saying s and z sounds. Autism spectrum disorder, you struggle to socially interact appropriately and tend to take figurative language very literally. ADHD, you have a very short attention span. Limited expressive vocabulary and mean length of utterance. These are fancy speech language pathology terms, right? An MLU, less than 4.0. That just means you don't have very many words, and the words you do have are pretty small and simple, and your sentences have to be really, really short, less than 4 words or so on average. And then lastly, again, severe dementia. You have lost most of your capacity for short-term memory and only have some long-term memories. And on your really bad days, you don't even know or remember them. So a couple examples again. With a lisp, there's a couple different options I wanted to explore here for a total stranger kid. If I'm talking to a total stranger kid and I have a lisp, one option for an answer to this, how I would explain it, would be something like this. Bees do lots of things. They are so busy. Some people do lots of things. They are so busy too. People can be busy as a bee. But then there might be another option for the same audience, another, same total stranger kid. Answer B might be like this. A bee can do a whole lot. More than one bee can do even more. They can fly, sting, hurt, maybe, a threat. Pollinate, a friend or family member might be like a bee, or even more than one bee doing a whole lot too, right? That friend or family member might be busy as a bee. And then the other example I want to do, lastly, is limited expressive vocabulary and mean length of utterance less than 4.0 without very many words. So, for my parent or grandparent with a shared experience to build from, I might say something like, Annika, bee costume, Halloween. Annika always busy. Busy Annika, like bees. So, I have some reasons for these answers that I would give about my examples and how I would explain them to these individuals, but I'm not going to spell it out at this point. I'm actually going to wrap up here. Conclusion and references. And so it can be really exhausting for speech language pathologists to do this kind of thing, making meaning through speech and language with their varied disordered clients of all kinds. So it's really important, both for the SLP, as well as the clients, as well as anybody else who uses speech and language, which we pretty much all do by virtue of being human. Be kind, be honest, be honorable, and be the best version of yourself you can be. Thank you.